Hi guys, hope you're well. Hope you had a good week. It's Sarah, your career and leadership expert. And today I'm going to talk about something that I haven't really talked much about before, and that's anxiety, how to manage anxious thoughts. Now, what I'm talking about here is that it's something that's been written about quite a lot, especially during the pandemic. There's a lot of discussions around mental health, how people are feeling at the moment. And I'm going to talk generally about anxious, feeling anxious, having anxious thoughts, and give you some tips and things like that. Now, anxiety is something that's actually quite common amongst people, and I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I've got anxiety, I'm feeling really anxious. But actually, there's so many different forms of anxiety. So there's about 5 different forms of it. There's general anxiety disorder. Now, that's a bit different than just feeling anxious in the moment. That's actually something that, if you went to your doctor, he might diagnose you with, as in it's something that you have a lot of. It's something that really kind of holds you back in life. And then you have things like obsessive compulsive disorder. And again, it's one of those things that people say, oh, my OCD, blah, blah, blah. And I always ask people, oh, so have you got an OCD diagnosis? Because sometimes we just say these things just to mean, I'm a bit, what's the word? I'm a neat freak, or everything has to be in order, rather than it actually being OCD. Then you've got panic disorder, and then you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, and then you've got phobias. So those are sort of 5 different expressions of anxiety. So general anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic, and social phobia. But I'm just going to talk generally about anxious thoughts. I'm not going to go into that whole clinical side of it. But anxiety, if you think about it, it's a worry, a fear, a feeling of unease. And many people have feelings of anxiety. It's just when they get out of control that actually sometimes people have to seek the advice of their healthcare professional. We can all feel anxious at times. We can all feel a bit fluttery. It might be about a job interview, about sitting an exam, anything like that can make us feel anxious. And most of us will feel that at some point, but it doesn't mean you're always going to be anxious. But if it is something that continues to happen, is sort of holding you back in life, and you're experiencing physical symptoms, then that might be something that you want to go and speak to your doctor about and sort of get some kind of diagnosis. Some people, so for example, some people find it really, really hard to control their worries, and it overwhelms, and the anxiety actually really affects their daily lives. And that's when anxiety and anxious thoughts are getting out of control. So general anxiety disorder is where you feel anxious, not just in a specific situation, but it's something that's happening broadly in your life, and you're worried about a wide range of things. So it's something quite widespread through your life, rather than just feeling anxious about one specific event. So that's the disorder, that's the actual disorder. If it's something that seems to happen across your life, rather than just one thing that you're worried about. And when people do have that general anxiety disorder, people really struggle to remember when they last felt relaxed, or they just aren't really in control of their lives. And as soon as one anxious thought is kind of resolved, another one pops up, another one pops up, another one pops up. So that's where it's at the more medical, clinical side of things. And it's actually quite a complicated thing. It's quite a complicated relationship with your mind. It's like your mind is sort of like overrunning you all the time. And despite different skill sets you might try, like meditation, positive self-talk, deep breathing, it kind of builds that fear, and so you're scared about things on a very regular basis, and it's really common. So if you do have something like that, then it is definitely worth speaking to your doctor and getting some advice about that, rather than the tips I'm going to give you today about when you are just feeling anxious. Maybe you've got, as I say, a job interview, or I don't know, perhaps you're getting married and you just feel anxious about that time. So feeling anxious at certain times for many of us can be very, very normal. So it's not that you've got some kind of anxiety disorder unless it's affecting your daily life, causing you stress, and affecting many, many different areas of your life. So if that's the case, that's something you should definitely speak to your GP. And it's when you talk about the anxiety disorders that I talked about in the beginning, and general anxiety disorder, it's like your brain is really sort of overactive, and there's an imbalance of the chemicals like serotonin and adrenaline that sort of help you to regulate your mood. So that is an actual thing, you know, that you can speak to your doctor about, because there are, you know, these physical causes. You know, the mind is constantly overactive in certain areas. It's an overactive mind, an imbalance of chemicals. It can be something that we inherit from parents, you know, and if somebody close to you, a relative, has had it, then you probably are more predisposed to having a general anxiety disorder. But it can also be caused, if it's something, like I say, the widespread sort of across, that sort of affects not just one situation in your life, but across your life. It might be if you've had a series of traumatic incidences or domestic violence or, you know, bullying and things like that, can really cause that general anxiety disorder and the other variants of that, as I described, to sort of take place, where people have OCD. But it's because their mind chronically wants to control what they're doing, because they've been out of control in lives than there before. Something has happened. And sometimes it can happen if people are like abusing drugs, alcohol, that kind of thing. Or sometimes it just happens. But about 5% of the population get it. And those people would tend to go, you know, if that is something, if that feels like you, shortness of breath, dizziness, palpitations, panic attacks, then it is worth speaking to your doctor, because he can have a look at you for different sort of psychological therapies, like CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, or, you know, it might require medication. So yeah, so that is, you know, when people say, oh, my anxiety is playing up, it might be that they actually have got anxiety because it's affecting a widespread area of their life, or they're just saying it. You know, we can all feel anxious at times, so it's important to distinguish that, because many of us at certain times will have some anxiety, we will feel worried, we will feel frightened, whereas if it's spreading across your life, that's something very different. But there are some things that you can, you know, that you can do. So you can think about your diet. As weird as it sounds, food can play a really, really big part in managing anxiety. So looking at, you know, whether you've got, you know, actually a clinical diagnosis of anxiety or just in general, making sure you're keeping your blood sugars in balance. You know, you're not eating unhealthily, so you get a massive spike in sugar and then a crash in the afternoon, but you're eating foods that, you know, I don't know, like sweet potato, vegetables, all the healthy foods we know about really help to stabilise your blood sugar, rather than an excess of sugar, an excess of caffeine, which can cause spikes in our blood sugar levels. I don't know if you've had it, but, you know, I remember years ago, I used to always eat like a jacket potato at lunch, which filled me up for about 5 minutes, and I'd have a bit of a crash afterwards. I'd feel really tired. And it was because it burns off actually quite quickly, even though it looks like a big piece of food. You know, that burns off quite quickly. So having a look at diet and thinking about your diet is really, really important. Physical activity is always really, really important. Whatever's going on in your life, physical activity is going to help you, even just a little bit. So it releases all the feel-good hormones that I've talked about before. So physical activity is really important. Going for a walk, getting some fresh air, it can really help. Again, whether you're just having an anxious moment in your life because of something that's happening at that time, or whether you have a more generalised sort of anxiety disorder. The other thing you can do, and this is what I talk about, you know, when I talk about stress or even building confidence, is try and keep a diary. If you feel that you're, you know, you might want to use the word anxiety, it could be worry, it could be fear, whatever word you want to use, unless it is that kind of clinical medical side of it that I've described before, where you might want to get some help from your doctor, is make a note of what happens, what triggers you. Are there certain situations that predispose you towards feeling a bit anxious? And like, keep a note of those and observe any patterns. What triggers it? Or what are the signs that I notice that I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling worried? Because like anything, it can start snowballing. If we don't recognise it or don't take notice of how we're feeling, it could be that actually you just do feel worried about or anxious about something. Maybe it is an exam, maybe it is a job interview, and because you're not noticing it and you've never noticed it before, it sort of snowballs into something. So keep a journal, you know, keep a note of, look, actually, do you know what I've noticed? I feel really kind of, I don't know, sweaty, sorry to use that word, sweaty, or short of breath, or, you know, my heart feels like it's racing. Keep a note of those things. I mean, obviously to go to your doctor if you're not feeling well, if you pass out, if you've got these really sort of obvious physical symptoms. But if it's something where you generally, do you know what, I'm feeling a bit anxious, a bit worried, a bit fearful, I've noticed that a few times lately. What's that about for me? Is it something about a situation that's reminding you of something else? Is it that it's a certain kind of person that triggers you? So make a note about what it is that triggers you and how you spot the signs of this coming on for you. You know, so some of the things that can trigger these anxious thoughts are, as I've mentioned, a job interview, an exam, a stressful work situation or job situation, driving actually, or travelling. You know, if you have been sort of abusing substances and things like that, withdrawal can cause really sort of high levels of anxiety, and that again may be something you'd want to talk to your doctor about. It can also be a side effect of medications you've been given. So again, it's really important that you know, if you're taking meds, read the leaflet. Nobody does, but I do. But anyway, you know, keep a note that, you know, it might be the side effects of even an over-the-counter medication. I mean, I know people that have taken painkillers and it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Side effects of medication. It could be a trauma from the past. It could be that you've got a phobia. Have you got a phobia about something? And sometimes, you know, phobias like agoraphobia, fear of going out, are linked to things in the past or a specific incident, you know, that you've had that reminds you of that. Obviously things like depression, they can cause anxiety. A lot of caffeine, as I've mentioned before, lack of sleep, having a lot of, if you've got chronic pain or an injury, that can cause it. It could be genetics, as I've mentioned before. So there's all sorts of things that can really cause it. So there's many different ways that it can be triggered. So you know, as I said at the beginning, there are the real sort of like classical 5 areas of anxiety disorders that a clinician, a psychotherapist would talk to you and diagnose that. Or there are these times where we just have an anxious moment, and that's what I'm really talking about. I'm just giving you more information about what triggers it so that you know, hang on a minute, when Sarah's talking about that, that's not just I'm worried about something, there's something else going on. So I just want to make you aware from a sense of responsibility. So I've already started giving you some tips about diet, about exercise, keeping a journal, understanding what triggers you, you know, keeping a note of what symptoms you feel. There are also online therapies you can look at. So there's things like the app called Karma. So it's a really, really great app that can really help you with your mindset, calming your mind. There might be a course online that you can take about managing anxiety. I talked about exercising, but you know, the normal healthy things to do, like not smoking, cutting down on alcohol, cutting down on caffeine. And do have a look at things like Karma or Insight Timer, Headspace. I think there's another one called Mind Valley, because there's going to be loads of content on there, and some of that content is from clinically trained psychiatrists and also psychologists that may well help you. So let me give you some more tips in addition to the ones that I've given you. What you could do, this is as long as you don't think you've got a clinical kind of condition of anxiety, but you're just feeling anxious, you've got these anxious thoughts running through your mind, set a time limit on worrying about your thoughts. If you're someone that just naturally tends to worry, just give yourself a time limit of, do you know what, I'm just going to spend the next 5 minutes worrying about this. I'm going to write down everything that's on my mind. I'm going to think about what is the worst that can happen, so that you kind of reassure yourself that you haven't forgotten to worry. Now that might sound weird, because I don't want you guys to worry more or be even more anxious about things, but set a timer, you know, and write down if there's something, a situation that you know is making you a bit worried, a bit nervous, write it out, write it all down, because getting it out on paper gets it out of your head and onto paper, and when it's in front of you, you can see it in front of you. It's not just swirling around in your head. So in a way, it's like giving yourself a little bit of permission to go into that and go, right, I've just got to get this off my chest. Because I think, you know, if you've listened to my other videos, I'm not a fan of suppressing how we feel. So set a timer, write it all out, and that's a really good exercise to do. And then read it, have a look at it, and think, hang on a minute, is this really making sense? What would my mate say to me? How realistic is this? And I mean, in coaching sessions, when people are nervous about making a change in their career or other area of their lives, I do ask the question, what's the worst that could happen? And we get it all out. We get it all out on paper, and we just make sure we've covered all the bases to say, well, hang on a minute, how likely is it that that's going to happen? And if I think that's going to happen, because this is a big shift for me, what can I do to mitigate it? What help do I need? So there are ways around worries. They don't have to like run and control you. It goes without saying, get support from, you know, peers. Maybe it's a colleague at work that you really trust. Maybe it's an online group that you belong to. Maybe it's a friend you know that is a really wise person that can help you and really help you talk these things through and listen to you. Because, you know, what I want to say is that it's normal for most people to be anxious or worried at some point. You know, it just does happen in life. And again, when I've given you that list before of what can cause it, then you can see, do you know what, I could have an injury one day and I could be predisposed to anxiety or worries. I could have a side effect from a medication. So, you know, it can happen. But the other thing you can obviously do is talk to somebody for help. You know, I've talked about friends, but I mean a trained professional. And if you speak to a trained professional, they're likely to sort of make a distinction between, well, do you know what, you're just worried about something, rather than it is actually a diagnosed condition of anxiety, such as OCD, the other things that I've talked about. The other big piece is sleep. I mean, I don't know about you, but everything seems 100% worse when I haven't slept, you know, and we can be more irritable, our moods can be low, because we just don't have the energy to cope with everyday life, and we can get overwhelmed quite easily. So sleeping is really, really important. Now, there might be some supplements that you want to take as well. You know, I'm saying, you know, make sure you check them out. But I don't know, like a lot of people set their store by aromatherapy. That's something that can work to reduce worry and stress. I mean, I know for guys that might not be something you want to do. Sorry, I'm not trying to be sexist, but you know, there are aromatherapy. I mean, I know it sounds weird, but on my table here, on my desk, I've got a little, I've got peppermint, and yeah, that's peppermint, and somewhere, and I've got patchouli, and I've used frankincense before. And sometimes, you know, we all have a little moment where it's like, oh, really busy today, and it's just like, whew. And I just have a little sniff of the oils, because things like peppermint, they can help relax you. Frankincense is really good for that. So this stuff, you know, have a look into all of that. Have a look into massage, because it may well be that if you're working at home a lot, you're tensing your body, your muscles are all strained, it's causing you to sort of take a lot of painkillers, or you're not sleeping. Do you see what I mean? So it's worth thinking about, well, why might I be anxious and worried? Is there a root cause behind it? Is it something that's happened in my life, or is it a result of hormonal changes, not sleeping, physical pain, medication, you know? And I've talked about the other things such as phobias and trauma. So sleep is really, really important. Now, if it is something where, or you're feeling, okay, I'm just worried about this at the moment. Yeah, I do feel a bit anxious about it, but it's not the kind of end of the scale where you feel you need to go to the doctors, then remember that your thoughts are just your thoughts. And you can think one thought, but then you can choose to think another thought. Now, I've talked about allowing yourself some time to really sit there and go into your worries, list them out, write about them, go into them, don't run away from them, because when we run away from things or hide from them, we sort of give them power rather than stepping into it and going, do you know what, just for this moment, I'm feeling worried. So as I've mentioned before about setting that time aside, you can think other thoughts. You can think of your thoughts like, I don't know, a car driving down the road or a boat sailing on the ocean. It's going to move, it's going to pass, but the more you fight your thoughts, you know, it's like swimming against the tide, the more difficult it is. So sometimes it's just riding that wave, and sometimes if you take a deep breath and just sit there, you know, even close your eyes, you know, put your hand on your heart if you want to, but be relaxed, your feet calmly on the floor, and just think, okay, this thought's going to pass, then it will pass. Usually it will pass, because it's like a wave in the ocean. When feelings, when these anxious, worried feelings don't pass, it's because we're ignoring them, we're trying to fight them. And actually, by stepping into them and saying, do you know what, I am feeling like this, just for now, not forever, you know, just for now, then we sort of take away the power. So, as I say, thoughts are like ships sailing on the ocean, clouds in the sky, waves in the ocean, because our heads can get really buzzy, especially when we're busy. And when we're busy, we can get overwhelmed. And when we're overwhelmed, you know, that feeling of like, oh my God, I've got so much to do, I can't cope. And I don't know about you, but I've had times in the past where I've got a bit forgetful. I've just forgotten something because I've been too busy. And it's usually because the left side of our brain and the right side of our brain, they perform different functions. The left side is the more analytical part, the right side is the more creative part. And we have a different balance between which side of our brains we use the most. We're all different. But what happens is when we're like tired, overwhelmed, our brain just stops. It's like that, what's the word, fight, flight, freeze scenario. The brain just stops. The two sections of the brain, I'm not saying your brain literally stops, but it freezes because it can't cope with how much it's got to process. So, you know, that's what can happen. So again, taking a break, fresh air, meditation is fantastic for the sort of worried and anxious thoughts, because you can, you know, again, I always recommend apps like Insight Timer, Calmer, and some of the other apps that I've mentioned, you know, YouTube even. They've got some fantastic meditations on there, guided meditations with a bit of music that you can listen to take some deep breaths, get that stale air out of your lungs, get the oxygenated, replenished blood and oxygen running through your brains. Then, you know, meditation is absolutely, you know, it does really work if you can get into the habit of doing it. And if you just do it for a few minutes, that's fine. And if you want to do it longer, great. I mean, I personally found when I first started meditating, it was like, oh, I'm not sure if I can do this, but it feels weird not to do it now. And I really enjoy it because it just feels so refreshing and I feel so much better afterwards, even if I am a bit tired, you know. Mindfulness, you know, mindfulness again, you know, I think mindfulness, you know, is acknowledged, you know, it's acknowledged within the NHS as something that can help. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. I absolutely love meditation. In fact, you know, you can sit there, be quiet and at peace when you're meditating. There's lots of different ways to do it. Sometimes, I know it sounds weird, you can do it when you're walking. I mean, don't close your eyes so you bump into a lamppost, but you just close your eyes, you relax. Close your eyes and relax, sorry, that's when you're sitting down. I don't want you to do that when you're walking. But you can just be walking along and just think of clouds or something, you know, you can sort of take those deep breaths. So that's where that mindfulness, I know, it's good, isn't it? I've never walked into a lamppost, by the way, I have to say, but there is a Buddhist temple near me, and we've done, it's not open at the moment, obviously, but they do a free half-day meditation workshop, and it's great because you sit in the room and you all meditate. That's fantastic. But the other thing they do is walking meditation. So you can go into a garden and it's really, really lovely and it's silent and everybody just walks around and you're just focused in the present, you know, focused on being mindful. You're meditating as you're walking along. So it does really, really, that can work quite well. You know, and there are schools of thought you can exercise and meditate. I would say that's like being in the zone when you're exercising, of course, with your eyes open. But mindfulness, focusing on the present moment, focusing on, right, okay, what am I eating? How does it taste? How does it feel? What are the smells? Now that might sound very clunky, but once you get into the habit of mindfulness, which is really focusing your attention and energy on the present moment, the easier it gets. So you won't have to sort of almost remind yourself to do it. It will become an impulse. It will become natural for you to sort of go, you know, sort of really take a moment, like this bottle of water I've got here. well, it's squat. It's vitamin D actually. It's multivitamins. And you know, you kind of get into the habit of doing it, of just taking that moment, relaxing. You know, I do it. You know, we all get times where we get a bit overwhelmed, and sometimes I just go, and I give myself a few moments just to focus on what I'm doing, or just sit there and focus on something in the room, focus on an object, and just let the moment pass. This stuff, honestly, I know a lot of people might find some of this difficult or a bit out there if you've never done it before, but it really does work, especially if you're sort of prone to, like I say, stress, worry. I'm not talking about the medicalised form, the medical diagnosis of anxiety, but if you have anxious, worried thoughts. Although that being said, the NHS does look at, does recommend mindfulness, you know, and the mental health charities recommend mindfulness, even for people that have regular bouts of anxiety, so it does work. Talked about things like massage, aromatherapy, giving yourself a specific time to worry about your thoughts. Right, I'm just going to say this. It might sound a bit weird, but you could also, like, not take your mind so seriously. And I don't know how that feels to you, but if you've got this feeling of, do you know what, I'm just always worried and I'm frightened it's not going to go away, you could say to yourself, oh, here we go, another one of those thoughts, thanks a lot, keep them coming. But something weird and funny like that, something a bit flippant, a little bit sarcastic. Now, if it doesn't feel right for you to do that with yourself, to yourself, then don't do it. But you could just say something, you know, when you notice this thought, you could go, oh, good one, thanks for that. And that might help lighten the moment so that you don't take your mind so seriously all the time, because it will stop you giving in to those negative thoughts, those anxious thoughts, those worrying thoughts. I mean, maybe you've got a catchphrase that you use. So I'd say something like, if it was me, I'd be like, great, nice one, thanks. You know, in a sarcastic way. And that's the sort of thing I joke about with my friends. So maybe you could treat your mind like a friend and muck about with it a bit, so that you're not constantly buying into what your mind tells you, because your mind sometimes will go into overdrive. You know, it thinks any little threat is a threat to your safety, and that is your mind doing its job, but sometimes it can get a little bit out of control. And sometimes we don't want to believe everything all the time that our mind is saying. You know, it's not always it's going to sound weird, it's not always a reliable source of information, especially when it's about the things that we are anxious about or worry about. Because if you think about it, when these thoughts come up, you could ask yourself, what will my best friend say? How would my best friend speak to me? And you can sort of play around with it a bit, because our mind takes all sorts of feeds from the external world. Yeah, absolutely, just challenge it a bit, as long as you feel comfortable. Or you could talk, as long as you're not talking to yourself in a disempowering, nasty way, just have a bit of fun with it. And just say, hey you, what are you doing? What's going on? Hang on a minute. Whatever that phrase is for you. And just sort of be a little bit playful with it, because we take our feeds from all sorts of things in the external world. I bet for many people, if you continue to watch the news 24/7, and I've done it actually, I watched, it was when, you know, when there was all the riots in Washington with Donald Trump, and I was watching CNN for a while because I'm quite interested in American politics, and it got to a point, it was like, do you know what? These guys are just moaning and it's getting me down. And I noticed it. I noticed a change in my mood. So our mind takes feeds from like external media. Perhaps you've got a critical partner, critical family member, perhaps a colleague's sort of been a bit snappy with us. So try and really manage those external feeds that come into our mind, because what will happen is, if we're not careful, our mind will, you know, it can flip and say, well, you know, I told you were no good, or well, you're never going to do that, or this interview is not going to be very good, or you're never going to succeed in that job. It might not be those exact words, but that's the message you're getting. So it's really worth catching those thoughts. I say this a lot when I talk about confidence, catching the thoughts, and go back to that journaling that I talked about before. What are the symptoms of me feeling worried or anxious? What are the triggers? Is it a person? Is it a situation? You know, just because you're anxious or worried about a specific thing in your life doesn't mean that you need to feel worried or anxious in the rest of your life. It might just be one specific thing. Give yourself time to write out, okay, what am I worried about? What's the worst that can happen? How do I mitigate that? What can I do differently? How can I speak to myself differently? Then, you know, give yourself that time to work it through, but challenge your mind, play with it. Use that phrase like I talked about, oh, hang on a minute, come on, really? You know, something funny like that, because our mind can play tricks on us. You know, and it's about becoming aware of what you're thinking when these thoughts are happening, because if we don't catch them, then you might end up in a situation where what's just a nervousness or worry about one situation cascades into the rest of your life. So the mindfulness, the meditation, the exercise, the sleep, cutting out caffeine, obviously not taking drugs and stuff like that, getting your sleep, massage, supplements, aroma, whatever it is, you know, all those things that I've talked about, the apps that I've talked about, speaking to someone, that can really help to break this stuff down and not let it snowball. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I have given some specific information about the various forms of anxiety and what they are and when you could seek medical help, and you should always do that if you're feeling out of control. But there's a lot we can do if we're just feeling worried in the moment to stop it snowballing, to stop it getting bigger and bigger, because a worried thought will feed another worried thought, another worried thought, another worried thought, and before you know it, that's become your habitual way of thinking. It's become a pattern. So when you're feeling a bit uncomfortable, when you're feeling worried, just challenge it and think, hang on a minute, right, what's going on here? What am I worried about? And really sort of ask yourself some questions, and don't worship your mind. You know, it's just your mind, it's just a thought. You can easily think another thought. A thought is only another thought away. You can shift it. You can say, hang on a minute, you know, do you know what, I'm going to stop, I'm going to let that thought go, because I've got this, I'm capable, I'm confident, I'm feeling more confident, I always find a solution. Look back at stuff that you've overcome in your life and use that as an example. So, do you know what? I did that and that worked really well. I overcame this. And I mean, I'm sure many of us have overcome things this year, certainly. So don't sort of pray at the altar of your mind, because sometimes it will play little tricks on us. It will take feeds from things that have happened in the past. And if it's something you think you can work on, then challenge yourself. Tell yourself a new story. You know, you could even have a little... like a little meme in your mind, or a little avatar if a worrying thought pops up. Sometimes I used to use I don't know if it's just in the US, you know, when you have like a traffic cop holds up the stop sign and it's a red stop sign, I think it's a hexagonal. I used to think that if I was feeling triggered or worried about something, I'd picture the stop sign and go stop, and now it's just automatic. If something sort of anything is bugging me on my mind, I'm worried about it, that stop sign comes up and I'm like, So I've embedded that as a habit, you know, to really notice that, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I'm a bit more worried about this than I thought. Maybe there's a possibility that I could overreact here. Maybe there's a possibility that I could make this worse before it gets better. Do you know what I mean? Because we all have stressful times. So maybe there is a nice little meme, you know, a funny little, you know, that meme that with the baby going like that, that's used on a lot of memes, or something like that. But the stop sign, I use the traffic stop sign. That's a really useful avatar for me. Anyway, so I've talked this evening, or this afternoon, I don't know if it's this afternoon or this evening really, about how to manage anxious thoughts. I've talked about the 5 different types of anxiety, when you might need to seek medical help, what causes it, what can trigger it, and the difference between, you know, the tips I've given you tonight are really about, in general, managing anxious thoughts and worry, or you can use them if it is a bit more, you know, what's the word, if it is a bit more pronounced than that for you. But obviously if you feel like you need to see a doctor because of physical symptoms of it, then go and see your doctor. And if it's definitely just holding you back in life, if it's holding you back in all aspects of your life, as in, I can't go out, I can't do this, I can't do that, then yeah, that really probably needs like psychological help and interventions. But it might not be. It might just be, do you know what, I've built up this irrational fear of interviews, or do you know what I mean, stuff like that. So there's loads of stuff on here. There's loads of ways you can just sort of play with your mind a bit and sort of go, come on now, let's think about this. And as always, it's about stepping into it. not to really go on a downhill slide, but sometimes when we fight things, we give them strength. Do you know what I mean? It's like arguing with someone. If you argue with your boyfriend, your partner, what you're doing is giving that argument more strength. You're feeding that energy. Whereas if it's just like deep breath, time out, whether you need to take like 15-20 minutes apart, oh my god, it's free relationship advice as well, who would believe it? But anyway, you know, sometimes, you know, when I'm just using the arguments of shouting and arguing with your partner as an example, when you're both doing that, you're feeding this energy back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You're caught in the drama, the vicious drama cycle. And the best way to break it is to stop, take a breath, and your thoughts are like that. If you keep feeding it and you keep arguing with yourself to kind of go, oh, I'm just going to ignore it. No, you're not. Yes, I am. Do you know what I mean? You're sort of arguing with yourself. So it's important to really go into these things, listen to the tips that I've given you, understand what's going on for you, because once you understand, it takes the power away from the thing that's worrying you. You can see it in a much more realistic light. So I hope you've all had a great week. I must admit, I'm probably going to put my feet up. Nightmare. I've just found out I can get Amazon Prime on my television, so I'm diving into This Is Us, as well as doing a bit of journaling this evening and a bit of meditating, because I haven't had time today so far. But whatever you're doing this weekend, keep fit, keep healthy, stay safe. I'll put this video on my page, so have a look back, listen to the tips at the beginning, and obviously anytime, any questions, just drop me a message, ask me a question, and I will see you all next Friday on my next video, which I can't actually remember what it's about, but it's on the events tab on my Facebook page. Anyway, have a great weekend, guys. Thank you very much for watching. It's lovely to see some of you. I know Sean and Kevin and Lisa. Yeah, just stay safe, enjoy. Deep breaths, people. You've got this. See you soon. Take care. Bye.